So we're beginning our chapter 2, and we're going into solving equations. So in chapter 1, we were just introduced to the basic concepts of equations. We looked at terms, constants, coefficients, like terms, that sort of thing. So if you all remember how to combine like terms and all of the properties that we learned, you should be A-okay for moving forward. So in this chapter, you're going to learn how to solve equations, including equations with variables on both sides of the equal sign, which is something new for you all, and using the properties of equality. And then you're going to develop the ability to solve problems by defining variables, and relating them to one another, and being able to write equations. So just for practice, you can complete the numbers 1 through 8 on page 74, for the check the skills that you'll need. So, new vocabulary. You have solution of an equation, equivalent equations, and inverse operations. So let's start with chapter 2 and section 1, solving one-step equations. So let's imagine that you have a balance or a scale, okay? And the middle of the scale has your equal sign. Each side of the scale has to be balanced. If there are 3 pounds on this side, there needs to be 3 pounds on the other side. So imagine that you have a scale, and on one side of the scale you have 2 plus 3. That means that on the other side of the scale you should have 2 plus 3, or the equivalent. Okay? So imagine that there's no 2. There's no 2. That means that each side of the equal will be 3. Okay? So, the addition property of equality and the subtraction property of equality is basically the same thing. Basically the same principle. It just says that both sides of the equal sign have to actually be equal. Okay? No need to get into serious detail so as not to confuse you. Okay, so let's do an equation, and let's talk about why we're going to do the equation like that. Let's try x minus 3 equals negative 8. So here's our equation. X minus 3 equals negative 8. Okay? So, as we're solving this equation, I'm going to go one step at a time. So the first thing that we notice is that we have 2 numbers on one side, or 2 terms on one side, and 1 term on the other, right? We have 2 terms on this side of the equal sign, and 1 term on this side. Now, we have a variable. Our variable is always going to be the number that we're trying to solve for. So x is what we're trying to solve for in this equation. That means that we need to get x isolated or alone by itself. How do we do that? Well, we know that if you take the opposite of any number and combine it with that number, it's 0, right? So that's our way of doing that. What we're going to do is add 3 to this side, and what we do to one side of the equation, we have to do to the other. We're going to add 3 to this side. Now, negative 3 plus 3 is 0, right? They cancel each other out. We don't have to rewrite 0. So we bring down our x equals. Okay? Now, we have negative 8 plus 3. The signs are opposite, correct? So now we're going to subtract. Sorry, I can't write a 5 backwards, upside down. 5. Now, the bigger sign, the larger sign is, the larger number is 8. So the answer, we take the sign for the answer of the number that's the larger. 8 is the larger number, so we take the negative sign for the answer. So x is going to be equal to negative 5. Let's see if this is true. Okay. The bottom, if you can see it, is to see if this answer is true. Negative 5 minus 3 equals 8. Does negative 5 minus 3 really equal 8? Let's see. Well, both of those numbers have the same sign, negative 3 and negative 5. So even though that it says to subtract, we're going to add. And the sign is the same, so it's just negative. Is negative 8 and negative 8 the same? Bingo. I think it is. Now, let's move on to multiplication. Really easy. The exact same way. We talked about the inverse and the difference between the inverse and the opposite, right? So, let's take this example. 4c equals negative 96. Now, remember, whatever it tells us to do, we have to do the exact opposite, okay? So we have 4c equals negative 96. This side of the equation is where our variable is. So this is where we'll begin work. This says that we're supposed to multiply. Any two numbers sitting right next to each other means multiplication. Well, we're supposed to take the opposite. So, 4 times c becomes 4c divided by 4. We're going to divide by 4 because we're trying to get c isolated by itself. Whatever we do to one side of the equation, we have to do to the other. So we're going to divide by 4 on this side. 4 divided by 4 is 1, so that cancels. We bring down our c equals, and 4 divided by 96 is 24. Anytime we have opposites and we have to either divide or multiply, we just take the negative. So the answer should be negative 24. Easy, right? And that is all that's in section 1 of solving one-step equations. When we come back, we're going to be solving two-step equations and multi-step equations. See you then.